to continue now, and again, want to invite you to use the hashtag #EndItNowNAD, hashtag #EndItNowNAD, and I want to present our next presenter. Mindy Salyers is an Adventist educator and a school counselor. Currently, she is the bullying prevention specialist at the Center for Conflict Resolution at La Sierra University. She has spent 15 years in elementary, academy, and higher education service working with at-risk youth and developing prevention and intervention services. Most recently, she has enjoyed training Adventist teachers and leaders across the North American division in creating cultures of kindness that prevent peer abuse and bullying among youth. Will you please help me welcome Mindy Salyers?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you as well as to our online audience. And I wanted to start off today by sharing a story about my own daughter. Her name is Brinley, and Brinley was a prayed-for pregnancy, a prayed-for infant, and a prayed-for baby. And yet, in her emergency delivery, she was deprived of oxygen for several minutes, which caused some severe developmental delay, even though she was our miracle baby. And because of that, she did not walk or crawl until 14 months of age. And she spent lots of time in hospitalization, in therapies, and with extensive medical training. Now, knowing that we had a child who was handicapped and eventually diagnosed with cerebral palsy, we knew that statistically she fell into children who are at risk for bullying and peer abuse. And so cognitively, we understood that Brinley, among other children, might fall victim to bullying. And research shows that those students and children and youth and young adults who are obese, those who have different sexual orientation, and those with disabilities like Brinley who experience special needs and medical issues are often those who fall into bullying victimization. And yet, Brinley, at 14 months old, and this is a picture of her taking her very first walk. So you can see the delight and pride on her face in getting to do a normal kid thing. And we wanted her to experience more normal kid things. So we chose to enroll her at age 2.5 at a local Christian preschool. And it was important to us when we chose that local preschool that it be one with Christian values, one where the educators brought that Jesus component, one where the students and the families subscribed to Christian values, and that the student-to-teacher ratio be really low. And this preschool checked off all of those different things. And yet, there was peer abuse and bullying present. And it was only about 2.5 weeks into the school year that the moms invited me to an after-school play date there on the preschool playground where the preschoolers, ages 2.5, 3, and 4, would go and play on their school play set, and the mommies would bring our sack lunches, and we would get to know each other. And so that afternoon came, and I took Brinley, and Brinley went straight to the swings, and I went straight to the other mommies to get to know them and become acquainted. And it wasn't 15 minutes into the play date when all of a sudden I see Brinley, little 2.5-year-old cerebral palsy Brinley, sitting on the swings, and a little girl comes running away from her shouting, "I hate you. I never want to be your friend." Now, as her mom, I thought, whoa, this is not okay treatment. And yet, I waited for the other mom to step in. This was not my kid. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand the dynamics happening. Certainly, that mom would step in and intervene. So I didn't intervene. And yet, the mom didn't intervene either. So there was my little 2.5-year-old Brinley on the swings, crying her eyes out, and no one stepped in. When we look at preschoolers and the beginnings of bullying and peer abuse, we can see that according to the Wall Street Journal, relational aggression, and that is using the threat of removing the friendship to manipulate the relationship, was detected in children, specifically females, as early as 2.5 years of age. And that was my Brinley. They're 2.5 years old on the playground. And you can maybe relate to either having experienced bullying or being an adult who saw a bullying incident happen and yet not intervening. And there I was, the adult that didn't intervene, and many times adults don't intervene because they may not know for certain if it's bullying. They may be wondering, is this bullying or is this just a friendship issue? What is this? I'm not going to intervene because I don't want to misjudge the situation. They may fail to recognize the importance of intervening. They may be uncertain how to do it. Is there a right way to do it? Am I going to make it worse if I step in and intervene? And then, like all of us adults, we're busy. And so it's easy to blow it off and because of a lack of time and just say, no, they're going to work it out. It's going to be okay. When we look at the biblical perspective on bullying and peer abuse, we see that this historical biblical issue has adults who also did not intervene. And I specifically look at the story of Joseph. There Jacob was the adult in this situation, there with a dysfunctional family, with a brother dynamic that he was pretty checked out of. And here is what Patriarchs and Prophets say. Jacob carefully avoided exciting the brother's anger by harshness or severity. So he didn't put into place consequences. There was no disciplinary action taken for bullying. And instead, Jacob implored them to have respect. Here's what that sounds like to me. Can't we just all get along? Why don't you be kind? Go be friends. So it's very important for us as ministers and teachers and youth directors and Adventure and Pathfinder Club leaders to know what bullying is and what bullying is not. Here are some of the myths I hear about bullying. That bullying behavior is limited to only kids. That bullying is a rite of passage. Hey, this is just part of growing up. Figure it out. This is part of being a kid and growing up. But that bullying is a necessary experience to develop assertiveness. Figure it out. Stand up for yourself. This is what childhood is about. And that bullying is limited to a specific demographic, maybe inner city or maybe public school. And that bullying is unique to secular communities. Of course, this doesn't happen in Christian-based, Jesus-infused environments. So this is what bullying is not. And let's take a look at what bullying is. Bullying is present at all ages, and you here in this room and you online as well can relate to this, right? Whether you're on a school board committee or whether it's in your workplace environment or whether it's in your church with your church leadership. Bullying is present at all ages with children, youth, and adults. Bullying is unnecessary and preventable. This is not something that you have to go through when you're growing up. You don't have to go through this. It's not a rite of passage. This is across all demographics. It doesn't matter if you're in inner city, if you're in a secular environment, if you're in a sacred environment, in a private country, one-room school. Bullying is everywhere. Bullying is present in our faith-based communities, in our churches, in our Sabbath school rooms, in our Pathfinder and Adventure clubs. And bullying is historical and biblical. We see it from the beginning of time. But most importantly, it's a human behavior. Because we're all human, we're going to see it. So when we take a look at bullying and understand the dynamics that are happening with bullying, we can easily relate it to other forms of abuse like spousal abuse or child abuse because there is an imbalance of power or strength. So I refer to bullying as being peer abuse because there is not the ability to defend yourself. So here, according to Dr. Dan Olveus, who is considered the father of bullying prevention, is peer abuse defined. And I invite you to read it aloud with me, and you online as well can join me. On the count of 3, let's read this definition together. 1, 2, 3. Bullying is when someone repeatedly and on purpose says or does mean or hurtful things to a person who has a hard time defending himself or herself. And we see in this definition that there are 3 main components for peer abuse. The first is that it involves an aggressive behavior. It typically involves a behavior that happens over time, a pattern. And then finally, we see that imbalance of power or strength that makes it hard to defend yourself. There are 2 main types of peer abuse, the direct and the indirect. We see the direct being those obvious forms, right? The hitting, the taunting, the name calling. And then the indirect forms as being those that are more subtle, the rumors, the exclusion, the cyberbullying. And again, we see this historically too. Here we are in the story of Joseph, and here's what Patriarchs and Prophets describes a bullying incident as. And let's take note of the different types of bullying, whether they're indirect or direct, in the story of Joseph. He, meaning Joseph, was terrified by the angry and revengeful glances that he met. So that's your indirect, very subtle forms of bullying. He was seized, that's your physical bullying, and his coat stripped from him, that's abuse of property. Taunts and threats revealed a deadly purpose, that's the verbal bullying. His entreaties were left unheeded. He was wholly in the power of those maddened men. And again, there's that imbalance of power and strength. So when we think specifically about our Adventist communities, here are the locations that we need to keep in mind as we're looking to identify bullying and peer abuse. It's present in our Adventist elementary schools, in our academies, in our universities and colleges. It's present in our Sabbath schools, in our early childhood centers, in our VBSs, in our summer camps, and in our Adventure and Pathfinder clubs. These are where we see it, and we need to keep our radar up for it. So typically, and kind of stereotypically, when we think of a bullying incident, we think of 3 different roles. We think of the person who is doing the bullying, the person who is being bullied, and the bystander. But in reality, when we take a closer look at that dynamic, we see that there's 8 different roles. When we look at the center right there, role H, We see that the student who is bullied is surrounded by these different individuals, by 7 different types of participants. A is your stereotypical individual who does the bullying. This is the one that takes an active part in the bullying, and he or she is backed up by the henchman or the supporter or the toady, the crony. This is the follower, B, who takes an active part but does not start the bullying. So this is not the initiator. Then there's the supporter, letter C, who supports the bullying but does not take an active role. So this might be the person who goes later and whispers and tells gossip about the bullying incident. The passive supporter, letter D, is a person who likes the bullying but does not display open support. So all 4 of those are actively engaged in the bullying incident. Then when you come down to kind of that bottom of that semicircle is the disengaged onlooker. This is the individual who knows about the bullying, knows that it's happening, but totally checks out because they don't want to have anything to do with it. I have had a school principal share with me that as a child, her father was her school principal. And because of that, she intentionally chose to be a disengaged onlooker because she did not want to be seen as the narc or the tattletale. So this is a safe spot because you're not joining the bully, the one who's doing the bullying, but you're also not stepping into a defender role. As we move around the semicircle, you can see that letter F is the possible defender. This is the individual who feels a large amount of empathy for the individual who's being bullied, and yet they don't help because they don't have tools in their toolbox to defend. They want to, but they can't. This is the population that we want to really target and empower because they are empathic, and we want to teach them how to safely intervene and become a defender. And then finally, letter G is the defender, the one who dislikes the bullying, can't take it anymore, and steps in to help the bullied student. What we want to make sure that we're teaching our children and our youth and young adults is that you can be a defender and still be safe. Because we typically think of the student who's doing the bullying and the student who's being bullied, and if you insert yourself as a defender, you then absolutely, you're in danger of becoming bullied yourself. So when I go around and talk to students, I am very intentional to teach them safe defender methods. And here's what some of them brainstorm and come up with. Report to an adult. Tell the bullied person later, I'm really sorry that happened. Invite the bullied person to play. And then finally, plan ahead with the person who's being targeted and set a strategy to keep them safe. When we think again in the biblical perspective, I think of the story of Esther. How Esther really, when she first became aware that Haman was bullying and using peer abuse tactics against Haman, was in the disengaged onlooker role. She knew about it, but she really didn't want to become involved. And yet it took 4 attempts, and let's count them, 4 attempts for Esther to move from the disengaged onlooker role into the defender role. So first, she went and risked her life to enter the king's courts, and he did what? Extended the scepter, right? And at that point, did she say, do you know what Haman's doing? No. She said, why don't you come to my house and have a dinner? So that's attempt number 1. And then she has him to dinner. And when she has him to dinner, does she say, this man across the table, do you know what's going on? No. She invites him again to a second dinner. And at the second dinner, finally, she takes the initiative and she says, let me tell you what's been happening. Let me tell you about the plot that Haman has against not just Mordecai, but the whole Jewish population. So here's what Patriarchs and Kings says about Esther in the defender role. Esther faced a crisis that demanded quick and earnest action, but it really took her some time, right? She prayed very fervently about it. She fasted about it. She put a lot of thought and strategy into how best to use defender tactics to protect Mordecai and the Jews. And then when we think about the king really in his leadership role, and this is a role that many of you can relate to as pastors or youth directors or educators, he was in an obligated role as king, meaning that he was legally or morally obligated and bound to a course of action. So when this report of bullying and peer abuse came to him, the king did a what to do that we should all take a note of. He was approachable. Remember, he extended his scepter. He was responsive. Esther, tell me, even up to half of my kingdom, what is it that you want? He made quick action. He took Haman right out of that leadership role, and then he put into place future prevention to protect not just Mordecai, but the Jews by writing that edict. So we can really take some strategy from the king as the obligated leader when bullying was reported to him. I tell students all the time that just like adults, where you go to your workplace and your place of employment and you have rules about harassment and things that protect you in your workplace, students, when they go to school and church functions and Pathfinder campouts, also need those same kind of rules to protect them in their workplace, because their job right now is to go to school and be kids. And so we have to ensure that our students and our kids and our youth and young adults have employee rights too in their kid workplace, and that there is safety precautions built in order to protect them from peer abuse. When I travel and do studies and research with our Adventist schools, the statistics come back when kids report in a survey that Adventist kids, I should say students in Adventist schools, are at a national average for experiencing bullying 2 to 3 times a month. They're right there with the national average. However, what's way above national average is how students respond, that they trust their youth directors, and they trust their Pathfinder leaders, and they trust their educators and their principals and their teachers, that when they report something about peer abuse or bullying, that will be taken seriously and something will be done about it. That's our Adventist advantage, that we have connections with youth, connections with our kids, and the relationships to support it. The Center for Conflict Resolution at La Sierra University has really taken to heart the SDA Call for Peace, which was commissioned by the GC Executive Committee in 2002. And I just very briefly want to read to you this call for peace, which is so beautiful and makes me so proud of our denomination. Let's go to the red part. Each of the Seventh-day Adventist 6,000 schools, colleges, and universities is being asked to set aside 1 week each school year to emphasize and highlight through various programs respect, cultural awareness, nonviolence, peacemaking, conflict resolution, and reconciliation as a way of making a specifically Adventist contribution. And it goes on to say that the education of the church member in the pew, or I might say of the student in the desk, for nonviolence, peace, and reconciliation needs to be an ongoing process. And here's a message for you, seminary. Pastors are being asked to use their pulpits to proclaim the gospel of peace, forgiveness, and reconciliation, which dissolves barriers for race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, and religion, and promotes peaceful human relations between individuals, groups, and nations. Can I hear an amen? That's a beautiful statement from our denomination. So it's the Center for Conflict Resolution at La Sierra. It's our expressed goal to help you resolve actual or potential conflicts and implement peer abuse by putting into place this culture of kindness, whether it's in your churches or your schools or your youth organizations. And we've been doing that since 2012 for over 150 different organizations. This is heart work that we're talking about, and it's hard work. And I just want you to see this dynamic of this Adventist educator in the Washington conference. And you can see in that first picture the dynamic of these two students who are crying, they're wiping their eyes, they're kind of standing defensively, and yet he is down on their level, and he's creating a culture of kindness and peacemaking. And the second picture shows the resolution of it, that they're hugging and forgiving one another. And I think this is a beautiful testament to the potential we have as leaders in our Adventist community. Last slide and last story. This is my daughter, Brinley, who's now turning 8 this month. And I have to tell you that this little girl, despite all of her medical challenges, despite being bullied, is now a defender of others. She represents kindness to others because she understands the importance of kindness. And we too can be defenders and really spread this kindness message that is rooted in Christ-like principles, that it's empowered in our individual relationships, and that's reinforcing a community of kindness in our churches and schools. Thanks so much.